My name is Olivia Rose, and at 34 years old, I built a $25 million empire from absolutely nothing. No trust fund, no family connections, and definitely no college diploma. For nearly a decade, I quietly lifted my family out of financial struggles, while they whispered behind my back about my questionable career choices. But last spring, at my mother's 60th birthday celebration, everything shattered when my father called me a worthless dropout and told me I was an embarrassment to the family name. What he didn't realize was just how far I had climbed from the bottom. The expression on his face 6 weeks later made every sleepless night and every tear worth it. But before I take you through this incredible journey of heartbreak and triumph, I'd love to know, where in the world are you experiencing this story? Drop a comment and let me know your city. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the very people who should champion your dreams, hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories that prove success comes in many forms. I grew up in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, where rain fell as regularly as expectations and both seemed designed to dampen spirits. My father, Robert, had worked as a high school principal for 25 years, believing with religious fervor that education was the only gateway to respectability. My mother, Linda, managed the local library and reinforced his academic gospel with quiet but persistent pressure. From childhood, I knew I was the odd puzzle piece in our family portrait, never quite fitting the frame my parents had constructed. While my older brother Marcus excelled in debate club, and my younger sister Claire collected academic awards like trophies, I spent my childhood building elaborate business ventures that baffled my parents. At 8, I wasn't selling simple lemonade. I created a neighborhood refreshment service with 3 different stations, seasonal menus, and a customer loyalty program made from hand-drawn punch cards. By 11, I was troubleshooting computers for neighbors, charging $15 an hour when Best Buy's Geek Squad wanted $60. Olivia needs to stop playing store and focus on her homework, my father would announce at dinner, his voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment I'd grown to recognize. These little games won't matter when it's time for college applications. But they weren't games to me. Each venture taught me something vital about customers, profit margins, and problem solving. When my computer repair service grew to 10 regular clients, I experienced my first taste of genuine accomplishment, the kind that couldn't be measured by report cards or gold stars. High school amplified the tension between my entrepreneurial instincts and my family's academic expectations. I maintained decent grades to keep peace at home, but my real education happened after school. While Marcus prepared for debate tournaments and Claire studied for AP exams, I launched an online boutique selling vintage jewelry I sourced from estate sales and thrift stores. Working from my bedroom, I photographed each piece, wrote compelling descriptions, and managed customer service emails late into the night. The business exploded during my junior year. What started as weekend hobby money, maybe $50 here and there, suddenly became serious income. I was earning $300 some weeks, more than my part-time job at the mall could ever provide. The thrill of watching my bank account grow from my own efforts was intoxicating. But when I tried to share my excitement with my parents, their response was predictably lukewarm. "That's nice, honey," my mother would say, barely glancing up from grading papers. "Just don't let it interfere with your SAT prep." My father was more direct. "Online selling is a hobby, not a career path. You need to think about your future seriously." Their dismissal stung, but it also fueled something fierce inside me. I would prove that success couldn't be confined to their narrow definition. I doubled down on my business, reinvesting every dollar back into inventory and learning everything I could about e-commerce, digital marketing, and customer psychology. By graduation, my little hobby had generated over $8,000 in profit. I had taught myself website design, photography, social media marketing, and basic accounting. I understood profit margins, seasonal trends, and customer lifetime value better than most business majors. Yet when college acceptance letters arrived, the pressure to conform reached its peak. "You got into Portland State with a partial scholarship," my father announced proudly at dinner. This is your chance to get serious about your education and leave these internet distractions behind. The weight of family expectations pressed down like a heavy blanket. Everyone assumed I would follow the prescribed path. 4 years of college, a respectable degree, maybe graduate school, then a steady job with benefits and a retirement plan. It was the American dream, according to my parents' generation. But sitting in my first business administration class that fall, listening to a professor who had never run an actual company lecture about entrepreneurship from a textbook, I felt like I was suffocating. The theory seemed disconnected from the real-world challenges I had already navigated. The pace felt glacially slow compared to the rapid learning that came from actual business experience. 3 months into my freshman year, I made the decision that would define everything that followed. I was going to drop out and pursue my business full-time. The conversation with my parents lasted 3 hours and ended with my father's ultimatum ringing in my ears. If you throw away this opportunity, don't expect us to bail you out when reality hits. Looking back, I realized that moment was when I truly began building the empire that would eventually silence all their doubts. But at 18, walking away from everything my family valued, I had no idea how long and difficult the journey ahead would be. The silence in our living room, after I announced my decision, felt heavier than the Portland rain hammering against the windows. My father's face had gone through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple that matched the storm clouds outside. My mother sat frozen, her coffee mug suspended halfway to her lips, as if stopping mid-motion could somehow freeze time and undo what I had just said. "Absolutely not," my father finally managed, his voice barely controlled. "I will not allow you to throw your life away on some ridiculous fantasy. You think you're smarter than everyone who came before you?" "Robert, please," my mother whispered, finally setting down her mug with shaking hands. "Let's discuss this rationally." But there was nothing rational about the storm that followed. For 3 days, our house became a battlefield of arguments, ultimatums, and tears. My father wielded statistics about dropout failure rates like weapons. My mother alternated between pleading and silent disappointment, which somehow hurt worse than Dad shouting. Marcus, home from his first year at Stanford, looked at me like I had announced plans to join a cult. "Do you have any idea how privileged you are to have this opportunity?" he said during one particularly brutal family meeting. "There are thousands of kids who would kill for your scholarship." Claire, only 16 but already accepted into the advanced placement track that would fast-track her to early college admission, simply shook her head in disgust. "You're embarrassing us, Olivia. What am I supposed to tell my friends when they ask what my sister is doing with her life?" Their words cut deep, but what hurt most was their complete inability to see what I had already accomplished. In their minds, my $8,000 in profit was monopoly money, my understanding of digital marketing was worthless internet knowledge, and my vision for a larger business was nothing more than adolescent delusion. On the 4th day, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. My entire life fit into the back of my beat-up Honda Civic clothes, business inventory, my laptop, and the small savings account that represented my independence. My father watched from the kitchen window as I loaded the car, his arms crossed and his expression unforgiving. My mother came outside as I was closing the trunk. "Where will you go?" she asked quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I found a studio apartment downtown," I told her, accepting her awkward hug. "I'll be fine, Mom. You'll see." But as I drove away from the only home I had ever known, fine felt like the most optimistic lie I had ever told myself. The studio apartment was everything you'd expect for $400 a month in downtown Portland, which is to say, it was barely livable. The previous tenant had apparently been either a chain smoker or someone who enjoyed burning things, because everything smelled like an ashtray. The single window looked out onto an alley where the dumpsters overflowed every Tuesday, and the thin walls meant I could hear my neighbors' television, arguments, and bathroom habits with uncomfortable clarity. I spent my first night sitting on an air mattress in the middle of the empty room, surrounded by boxes, and wondering if my father might be right. The studio felt like a concrete representation of how far I had fallen from their expectations. No family support, No college dorm room with built-in friends, no clear path forward. Just me, my laptop, and a dream that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. But morning brought perspective, and with it, determination. I had $2,000 in my bank account, a profitable online business model, and more real-world experience than most of my former classmates would graduate with. If I was going to prove my family wrong, I needed to stop wallowing and start building. The first month was a masterclass in survival economics. I lived on ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever samples I could find at grocery stores. I furnished my apartment entirely from Craigslist and garage sales, a desk made from a door and 2 filing cabinets, a chair that leaned slightly to the left, and a futon that served as both bed and couch depending on the hour. Every penny that didn't go toward rent or bare-bones survival got reinvested into inventory. I haunted estate sales and thrift stores across the Pacific Northwest, developing an eye for pieces that would photograph well and appeal to my online customers. My jewelry business grew from a bedroom hobby to a full-time operation, with orders coming in daily from customers across the country. The breakthrough came when a fashion blogger with 50,000 followers featured one of my vintage necklaces in her weekly style roundup. Orders flooded in faster than I could process them. I worked 18-hour days for 2 weeks straight, photographing pieces, writing product descriptions, managing customer service emails, and packaging orders on my makeshift desk. That month, I earned more than my father made in 2 months as a principal. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like calling my parents to share the good news. Maybe now they would understand that I hadn't thrown my life away after all. The phone rang 3 times before my mother answered. "Olivia? Is everything all right, honey? You don't usually call during the day." "Everything's great, Mom," I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. "I wanted to tell you about my business. I just had my best month ever." "That's wonderful, dear," she interrupted gently. "But you know your father is still very upset about the college situation. Maybe we should wait a little longer before discussing your projects." The word projects hit like a slap. Even my success was being diminished, categorized as something temporary and insignificant. I hung up feeling smaller than I had since moving out. That night, sitting alone in my tiny apartment with order confirmations lighting up my laptop screen, I made a promise to myself. I would build something so undeniably successful that even my father would have to acknowledge it. I would prove that there were multiple paths to success, and mine was just getting started. I had no idea that promise would take nearly 8 years to fulfill, or how much it would cost me along the way. Success, I quickly learned, was not a straight line. After that initial breakthrough month with the fashion blogger feature, I thought I had cracked the code. Orders were flowing in, my bank account was growing, and for the first time since leaving home, I felt genuinely confident about my decision. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans for my education. The first major blow came just 3 months later. I had expanded beyond vintage jewelry into handmade accessories, partnering with local artisans to create unique pieces I could sell at higher margins. Everything was going perfectly until I received an email that made my stomach drop. One of my biggest wholesale orders had been returned by the shipping company. Damaged in transit, they said. 30 pieces, worth over $2,000 in retail value, destroyed. The insurance claim was denied due to insufficient packaging. The customer demanded a full refund. And suddenly, my biggest profit month turned into my biggest loss. I spent that night on my futon couch, surrounded by broken jewelry and bubble wrap, trying not to cry as I calculated how far this setback would push me back. But that was just the beginning of what I now call my trial by fire period. My second venture was a disaster wrapped in overconfidence. Riding high on the success of my jewelry business, I decided to branch out into custom t-shirt printing. The startup costs were minimal, just a heat press machine and some supplies, and the profit margins looked incredible on paper. I envisioned building a whole brand around personalized apparel for small businesses and special events. The reality was humbling in the most expensive way possible. My first major order came from a local restaurant chain wanting 50 custom shirts for their staff. I quoted them a price that I thought was competitive, completed the order in my tiny apartment, and delivered them with pride. Everything seemed perfect until the restaurant owner called me 2 days later, furious. "These shirts are falling apart," he screamed into the phone. "The letters are peeling off after one wash. This is completely unacceptable." I had used low-quality vinyl because it was cheaper, assuming it would be sufficient for the job. I was wrong. Not only did I have to refund the entire order, but I also had to pay for replacement shirts from a professional printer to salvage the restaurant's reputation. What should have been a $1,500 profit became a $3,000 loss. The pattern continued with painful consistency. I launched a subscription box service for vintage finds, only to discover that sourcing enough quality items monthly was nearly impossible. I tried dropshipping imported goods, but dealing with suppliers in different time zones led to miscommunications, delayed shipments, and angry customers. Each failure taught me something valuable, but the lessons came at a cost I could barely afford. By my second year in the studio apartment, I had failed at 7 different business ventures. My savings were depleted, my credit card was maxed out, and I was surviving on a diet that consisted mainly of rice, beans, and whatever expired produce I could get discounted at the grocery store. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if my father had been right all along. The lowest point came on a rainy Tuesday in February. I was behind on rent, my laptop was acting up, and I had just received another complaint from a customer whose order had gone wrong. I was sitting in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of failed business attempts, boxes of unsold inventory, broken equipment, and stacks of unpaid bills, when my phone rang. It was Claire, calling from her college dorm room. She was a freshman at Oregon State now, studying pre-med with a full scholarship and perfect grades. Her voice was bright and confident as she told me about her classes, her friends, her internship opportunities. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "How's your business stuff going?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could have told her the truth, that I was barely surviving, that every day felt like a struggle, that I had moments of serious doubt about my choices. Instead, I painted a picture of modest success, downplaying my struggles and emphasizing the few bright spots. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the black screen of my laptop. Who was I kidding? My sister was thriving in the traditional path I had rejected, while I was drowning in the consequences of my stubborn independence. Maybe my family had been right. Maybe I was just too proud to admit I had made a terrible mistake. That night, I came closer than ever to calling my parents and asking to come home. The phone was in my hand, their number dialed, my finger hovering over the call button. All I had to do was admit I was wrong, apologize for my arrogance, and accept that their way was the right way. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the memory of that fashion blogger feature, and the pure joy I had felt when my business succeeded. Whatever it was, it kept me from making that call. Instead, I did something that would change everything. I went to a networking event. The Portland Small Business Association was hosting a monthly meetup at a coffee shop downtown. I had seen the flyer weeks earlier, but had been too intimidated to attend. What could I possibly contribute to a room full of successful entrepreneurs? But sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by my failures, I realized I had nothing left to lose. The coffee shop was packed with people who looked exactly like I imagined successful business owners should look. Confident, well-dressed, speaking in jargon about profit margins and market penetration. I almost turned around and left before I even ordered a drink. But then I saw her. She was probably in her 50s, sitting alone at a small table with a notebook and a cup of tea, watching the crowd with the same mixture of curiosity and intimidation I felt. Something about her quiet presence made her seem approachable, so I gathered my courage and walked over. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked. I'm new to these events and feeling a bit overwhelmed. She smiled and gestured to the empty chair. "Please do. I'm Margaret, and I completely understand. These things can be intimidating when you're just starting out." What followed was a conversation that lasted 3 hours and changed the trajectory of my entire life. Margaret had built and sold 2 successful companies, but more importantly, she had failed at 4 others before finding her path. She listened to my story without judgment, nodding knowingly at my litany of mistakes and near disasters. "Failure is tuition," she said simply when I finished recounting my struggles. The question isn't whether you'll fail, it's whether you'll learn from it. And from what I can see, you're getting quite an education. By the end of the evening, Margaret had offered to mentor me. Not with money or connections, but with something more valuable. Wisdom earned through her own hard-fought battles in the business world. For the first time in months, I went home feeling hopeful about my future. I had no idea that this chance encounter was about to launch me toward the success that would eventually silence every doubt my family had ever expressed. Margaret Chen didn't look like the typical image of a successful entrepreneur. She drove a modest Honda, wore simple clothes, and carried her notes in a worn leather portfolio that had seen better decades. But when she spoke about business, her quiet authority commanded attention. Our first official mentoring session took place the following week at her favorite bakery, a small family-owned place that served the best croissants in Portland. "Tell me about your failures again," she said, pulling out a yellow notepad as I settled into the chair across from her. "But this time, I want you to focus on what each one taught you." It was a different way of thinking about my disasters. Instead of dwelling on the money lost or the embarrassment felt, Margaret guided me to extract the valuable lessons buried in each setback. The damaged jewelry shipment had taught me about proper packaging and insurance. The t-shirt printing failure had shown me the importance of quality materials and testing before scaling. Even my most spectacular disasters contained seeds of wisdom. Every successful entrepreneur I know has a graveyard of failed ventures behind them, Margaret explained, sipping her coffee. The difference between those who make it and those who don't isn't avoiding failure. It's learning to fail faster and cheaper. Over the next several months, Margaret became the business education I had never received in college. She taught me about market research, customer validation, and the importance of understanding your numbers before scaling. But more than tactics and strategies, she gave me something I had been desperately missing: perspective. "Your family sees your journey as chaotic because they don't understand the learning process," she said during one of our sessions. "To them, failure is the opposite of success. In business, failure is often the predecessor to success." Under Margaret's guidance, I began to approach my next venture with scientific rigor instead of emotional enthusiasm. Instead of jumping into another business idea because it seemed exciting, I spent weeks researching markets, talking to potential customers, and validating demand before investing a single dollar. The breakthrough came when I identified a problem that had been frustrating me personally: finding quality, ethically made home goods from small American manufacturers. Big box stores were filled with cheaply made imports, while supporting small domestic producers required knowing where to look and often paying premium prices that reflected their limited distribution. "There's your opportunity," Margaret said when I explained my frustration. "If you're experiencing this problem, thousands of other consumers probably are too." I spent 2 months validating this hypothesis. I created surveys for potential customers, reached out to small manufacturers, and studied the competitive landscape. The research confirmed what my instincts had suggested. There was a significant gap in the market for a platform that could connect conscious consumers with American-made home goods. Unlike my previous scattered attempts at various businesses, this venture felt different from the start. It combined my existing skills in e-commerce with a clear mission and thoroughly validated market demand. I decided to call it Hometown Crafted, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something with real potential for lasting success. But validation and execution are two very different challenges. My tiny studio apartment transformed into mission control for Hometown Crafted. I converted half the space into a photography studio, complete with lighting equipment and backdrop materials. The other half served as inventory storage, customer service center, and my living space, all rolled into one cramped but efficient operation. Finding manufacturers willing to work with an unknown startup proved more challenging than expected. Many small producers were already overwhelmed with their existing customer base and weren't interested in adding another sales channel. Others were skeptical about online marketing and preferred traditional wholesale relationships. Margaret's connections became invaluable during this phase. She introduced me to several manufacturers she had worked with in her previous businesses, and her endorsement opened doors that would have remained closed to me otherwise. Slowly, I began building a network of artisans and small manufacturers across the Pacific Northwest. My first partner was Elena Vasquez, who created beautiful ceramic dinnerware from her studio in Eugene. Her pieces were stunning, but she struggled with marketing and had never sold online. I offered to handle all the e-commerce aspects in exchange for exclusive online rights to her designs. "I make the pottery, you sell the pottery," she said, shaking hands on our partnership. "Sounds perfect to me." Elena became my proof of concept. I photographed her pieces, wrote compelling product descriptions, and launched the Hometown Crafted website with her ceramics as the featured collection. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first week, I had sold through most of her available inventory and had a waiting list of customers wanting more. Word spread quickly through the maker community. Other artisans began reaching out, wanting to join the platform. Within 3 months, I had partnerships with 12 different manufacturers, offering everything from hand-blown glassware to organic textiles. The business model was simple but effective. I would handle all the online marketing, customer service, and fulfillment, in exchange for a percentage of each sale. Manufacturers got access to a broader customer base without having to learn e-commerce, while customers got access to unique, high-quality products they couldn't find in mainstream retail. But success brought its own challenges. Orders were pouring in faster than I could process them. My one-person operation was quickly becoming overwhelmed by the demand I had worked so hard to create. I was working 18-hour days, sleeping 4 hours a night, and still falling behind on customer service emails and order fulfillment. The breaking point came during my 6th month of operation. A major lifestyle blog had featured Hometown Crafted in their holiday gift guide, driving traffic to my website that completely overwhelmed my basic hosting plan. The site crashed for 6 hours during peak shopping time, and I spent the entire night on the phone with technical support, trying to get it back online. "You need help," Margaret said when I called her in tears at 3 a.m. "This is a good problem to have, but it's still a problem that needs solving." She was right. I had proven the concept and built something with real traction, but I couldn't scale it alone. For the first time since starting Hometown Crafted, I needed to think beyond just surviving. I needed to think about growing. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had always worried I wouldn't be able to support myself with my internet business, and now I was facing the challenge of managing too much success. It was exactly the kind of problem I wished I could share with them, but the silence from home remained deafening. My parents had stopped asking about my business entirely. When I occasionally talked to my mother, she would ask about my health, my apartment, and the weather, but never about the work that consumed most of my waking hours. It was as if they had decided to pretend that part of my life simply didn't exist. But Margaret believed in what I was building. Under her guidance, I began planning the next phase of growth that would transform Hometown Crafted from a promising startup into the empire that would eventually force my family to confront their misconceptions about my choices. I just had no idea how dramatically that growth would exceed even my most optimistic projections. The transition from solopreneur to business owner happened faster than I ever imagined possible. Within 6 months of that website crash, I had moved out of my cramped studio apartment into a real office space, a converted warehouse in Southeast Portland that buzzed with the energy of other growing startups. For the first time in 3 years, I had employees, business insurance, and a company bank account with more than 4 digits. My first hire was Jessica, a recent marketing graduate who understood social media in ways that made me feel ancient at 23. She walked into the interview wearing vintage jeans and carrying a portfolio of Instagram campaigns she had created for local businesses, and I knew immediately she was exactly what Hometown Crafted needed. "Your brand story is incredible," she said, flipping through screenshots of our artisan partners, "but you're not telling it effectively. People don't just want to buy products, they want to buy into a mission." Jessica was right. Under her direction, we transformed our social media from simple product photos into compelling stories about the artisans behind each piece. She created video content showing Elena throwing pottery on her wheel, interviews with textile artists discussing their sustainable practices, and behind-the-scenes glimpses into the workshops where our products were created. The response was immediate and dramatic. Our social media following tripled within 2 months, and more importantly, our customer engagement rates soared. People were sharing our posts, tagging friends, and writing lengthy comments about why supporting American makers mattered to them. My second hire was David, a logistics coordinator who had managed fulfillment for several other e-commerce companies. The man was a wizard with shipping software and warehouse organization, transforming our chaotic inventory system into a model of efficiency. Under his management, our shipping times improved from 7 days to 3, and our customer satisfaction scores hit all-time highs. But the hire that changed everything was Rachel Martinez, a business development manager with 10 years of experience in retail partnerships. She joined us in month 8 with a Rolodex full of contacts and a vision for scaling that made my head spin. "You're thinking too small," she said during her second week, spreading spreadsheets across our conference table. "This model could work with hundreds of makers, not just the 30 you have now, and we should be thinking beyond direct-to-consumer sales. What about wholesale partnerships with boutique retailers? What about licensing deals with larger brands who want to offer authentic American-made collections?" Rachel's arrival marked the beginning of what I now think of as our explosive growth phase. She negotiated partnerships with artisans across all 50 states, expanding our product catalog from home goods to include clothing, jewelry, and specialty foods. She secured our first major retail partnership with a chain of upscale home stores, guaranteeing minimum orders that would triple our monthly revenue. By the end of our second year, Hometown Crafted represented over 200 American manufacturers and had processed more than 50,000 orders. We had moved to a larger warehouse space, employed 15 people full-time, and were featured in 3 major business publications as one of the fastest-growing e-commerce platforms in the Pacific Northwest. The numbers were staggering, even to me. Our monthly revenue had grown from $3,000 in those early days to over $400,000. My personal salary had gone from non-existent to 6 figures. I owned a real apartment with separate rooms, drove a reliable car, and for the first time since leaving home, felt financially secure. But perhaps most importantly, we were making a real impact. Elena's ceramics business had grown from a one-woman studio to a workshop employing 4 local artisans. A textile maker in North Carolina had been able to hire her daughter and avoid closing the family business that had been struggling for years. A woodworker in Vermont had expanded from making cutting boards in his garage to operating a full production facility. Margaret observed these changes with the pride of a parent watching their child graduate. "You're not just running a business anymore," she said during one of our monthly check-ins. "You're building an ecosystem that's creating opportunities for hundreds of people." She was right, but success brought complications I hadn't anticipated. The bigger we grew, the more complex our operations became. We needed better inventory management systems, more sophisticated customer service protocols, and stronger financial controls. I found myself spending more time in meetings about operational efficiency and less time talking directly to artisan partners about their products. The personal cost of growth was something I hadn't calculated either. 18-hour workdays had become normal, and weekends were just extensions of the work week with different lighting. I had built something incredible, but I was too exhausted to fully enjoy it. During this period, my relationship with my family remained frozen in a strange limbo. They knew I had some kind of business that was doing okay, but I had stopped trying to share details about my success. Their previous dismissals had trained me to keep my professional life separate from family interactions. The few times business came up during our rare phone conversations, the response was predictably lukewarm. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say when I mentioned hiring new employees. "Just make sure you're being responsible with your money." My father's comments were more pointed. "The internet economy is volatile," he warned during one particularly awkward call. "Make sure you're not getting ahead of yourself. These things can disappear as quickly as they appear." Their skepticism stung, but it also fueled my determination. I was no longer the desperate dropout struggling to survive in a studio apartment. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company that was growing faster than anyone had predicted. Yet somehow, my family still saw me as the irresponsible daughter who had thrown away her education. The disconnect became even more painful when my siblings shared updates about their conventional successes. Marcus had graduated from Stanford with honors and landed a prestigious job at a consulting firm in San Francisco. Claire was thriving in medical school, already talking about her residency plans and the specialty practice she hoped to establish. During family phone calls, their achievements were celebrated with enthusiasm and pride. When the conversation occasionally turned to me, there was polite interest at best, dismissive concern at worst. It was as if my success existed in a parallel universe that my family couldn't quite see or understand. But the validation was coming from other sources. Industry publications were calling me an innovator. Business schools were inviting me to speak to their entrepreneurship classes. Other entrepreneurs sought my advice about scaling e-commerce platforms and building sustainable partnerships with manufacturers. The contrast was jarring. Professional recognition from strangers and continued skepticism from the people who supposedly loved me most. 3 years after launching Hometown Crafted, we received an offer that would change everything. A major investment firm wanted to acquire us for $25 million. The offer would make me wealthy beyond anything I had ever imagined, but it would also mean giving up control of the company I had built from nothing. As I sat in my office, staring at the acquisition offer, I realized I was facing the biggest decision of my entrepreneurial journey. And for the first time in years, I wished I could call my father and ask for his advice, not because I needed it, but because I wanted him to finally understand what I had accomplished. The acquisition offer sat on my desk for 3 days before I could bring myself to read it completely. $25 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like playing money in a board game I had never learned to play. I kept finding myself staring at the letterhead from Morrison & Associates, one of the most prestigious investment firms on the West Coast, wondering if this was really happening to the girl who used to eat ramen noodles for every meal. Margaret was the first person I called. She listened quietly as I read the entire offer aloud, my voice shaking slightly as I reached the financial terms. When I finished, there was a long pause before she spoke. "How do you feel about it?" she asked, which was such a Margaret question. Never telling me what to think, always guiding me to discover my own answers. Terrified, I admitted, and excited. And completely overwhelmed. This is more money than I ever dreamed of having, but it also means giving up Hometown Crafted. This company it's everything I've worked for. "Tell me what scares you most about accepting the offer," she said. I had been wrestling with this question since the moment I opened the envelope. That I'll regret it for the rest of my life, that I'll always wonder what would have happened if I had kept building instead of selling. And I paused, embarrassed by how shallow this sounded. That my family will think I sold out, that I took the easy way out instead of building something lasting. And what scares you most about declining it? That I'm being stupid and prideful. That this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm too stubborn to take it. That I'll run the company into the ground and lose everything I've built. The words tumbled out faster than I could organize them. Margaret, what if this is as good as it gets? What if I turn this down, and in 5 years, Hometown Crafted is struggling and I'm back to eating ramen in a studio apartment? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When you started this company, what was your goal? To prove I could build something successful. To prove my family wrong about dropping out of college. And have you accomplished that goal? The question hit me like a revelation. I had spent so many years focused on the next milestone, the next level of growth, that I had forgotten to acknowledge what I had already achieved. Yes, I said slowly. I think I have. So now the question becomes, what do you want the next chapter of your life to look like? That conversation launched the most intense period of self-reflection I had ever experienced. I spent hours walking through Portland's neighborhoods, thinking about what I really wanted versus what I thought I was supposed to want. I made lists of pros and cons, ran financial projections, and spoke with other entrepreneurs who had faced similar decisions. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Elena, my first artisan partner. I drove down to Eugene to visit her expanded ceramic studio, officially to discuss some new product lines, but really because I needed to get out of Portland and clear my head. Her workshop had transformed dramatically since our early days. What had once been a single potter's wheel in a cramped studio was now a bright, airy space with multiple workstations, a large kiln, and 4 employees creating beautiful pieces. "Look at this place," I said, watching one of her newer artists carefully painting intricate designs on a vase. "You've built something incredible here." Elena smiled, wiping clay from her hands with a well-worn towel. "We've built something incredible," she corrected. "This wouldn't exist without Hometown Crafted. You gave me the platform to reach customers I never could have found on my own." As we toured the expanded facility, Elena told me about the other changes in her life. Her daughter had been able to attend art school without taking on crushing debt because of the steady income from their partnership. She had been able to buy her first house, something she had thought would never be possible as a single mother trying to make it as an artist. "I keep thinking about what my life would look like if you had never reached out to me," she said as we sat in her office, drinking coffee from mugs she had made herself. "I'd probably still be selling a few pieces at craft fairs, worrying every month about how to pay rent." Her words crystallized something I had been struggling to articulate. Hometown Crafted wasn't just my success story. It was Elena's story, and David the logistics coordinator's story, and Jessica the marketing coordinator's story, and the stories of hundreds of artisans across the country who had built better lives because of the platform we had created together. That night, I called the investment firm and declined their offer. The conversation with Morrison & Associates was surprisingly pleasant. The partner who had initiated the acquisition expressed disappointment but respect for my decision. "We'll be watching your continued growth with interest," he said. "And if you ever change your mind, our offer will likely increase rather than decrease." Declining $25 million should have felt devastating, but instead, I felt liberated. For the first time in months, I was excited about going to work the next morning. I had remembered why I had started this company in the first place. And it wasn't just to prove a point to my family, it was to build something meaningful that created opportunities for other people. But my decision had unexpected consequences. Word of the acquisition offer and my rejection of it somehow leaked to the business press. Within a week, I was fielding interview requests from reporters who wanted to know why a 26-year-old CEO had walked away from a life-changing payday. The attention was overwhelming but ultimately positive. The story that emerged portrayed me as a principled entrepreneur who valued mission over money, someone who is building a company for the long term rather than looking for a quick exit. Orders spiked as customers responded to the narrative of supporting a business that was committed to staying independent. More importantly, the coverage finally reached my family. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening in March. I was working late in the office, reviewing quarterly projections with Rachel, when I saw my father's name on the caller ID. My heart raced as I answered, unsure what to expect. "Olivia?" His voice sounded different than I remembered, less certain, more thoughtful. "Hi, Dad. I saw an article about you in the Wall Street Journal today." There was a long pause. "I think we need to talk." The conversation that followed was awkward, halting, and painful. But it was also the beginning of something I had been waiting for since I was 18 years old. My father had finally seen the scope of what I had built, and for the first time in 8 years, he was asking questions instead of offering criticism. $25 million, he said quietly. "You turned down $25 million. "I did." "Why?" It was the first time he had ever asked me to explain a business decision, instead of simply telling me it was wrong. As I walked him through my reasoning, the impact on artisan partners, the mission of the company, my long-term vision for growth, I could hear his perspective shifting in real time. By the end of our hour-long conversation, something fundamental had changed between us. Not forgiveness, exactly, and certainly not a complete healing of 8 years of mutual hurt, but the beginning of respect. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I was wrong about your choices. I was wrong about a lot of things." Those words, coming from the man who had called me a worthless dropout, meant more to me than any acquisition offer ever could. But they also marked the beginning of the most challenging chapter of my journey, the one where I would finally have to decide what success really meant to me. My mother's 60th birthday party was planned with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to everything else in her life. The invitations were hand-calligraphed. The menu was carefully curated to accommodate various dietary restrictions, and the guest list included everyone who had ever mattered in my parents' social and professional circles. It was exactly the kind of elegant, traditional celebration that had always made me feel like an outsider in my own family. For weeks leading up to the party, I debated whether to attend. My father's phone call had opened a door between us, but we had spoken only a few times since then, and the conversations remained tentative and careful. My relationship with my mother was even more complicated. She had been the peacemaker during our family's darkest moments, but she had also been complicit in my father's dismissal of my choices. "You should go," Margaret advised during one of our monthly lunches. "Not because you owe them anything, but because you deserve to be there as the successful woman you've become." She was right, but knowing I should attend and actually looking forward to it were two different things entirely. I had spent 8 years building a life and identity, completely separate from my family. The thought of stepping back into their world, even temporarily, felt like putting on clothes that no longer fit. The party was held at my parents' house in the same suburban neighborhood where I had grown up. As I pulled into the driveway, I was struck by how small everything looked. The house that had once seemed so imposing now felt modest, almost quaint. The perfectly manicured lawn and carefully arranged flower beds spoke to a different kind of success than what I had been building. Stable, traditional, predictable. My mother opened the door before I could knock, and for a moment we just looked at each other. She was wearing the navy blue dress she reserved for special occasions, her graying hair styled in the same way it had been for 20 years. But there was something different in her eyes, curiosity, maybe, or uncertainty about how to navigate this reunion. "Olivia," she said, stepping forward to hug me. "You look successful." It was such a perfectly mom thing to say, acknowledging the obvious while avoiding anything too effusive. I was wearing a tailored blazer and dress that probably cost more than I used to spend on clothes in an entire year, but I had chosen the outfit carefully to avoid looking flashy or intimidating. "You look beautiful, Mom." "Happy birthday." The living room was filled with familiar faces. Teachers from my father's school, librarians and book club members from my mother's social circle, neighbors I had known since childhood. The conversations quieted slightly when I walked in, and I could feel the weight of curious stares and whispered questions. Everyone knew I had dropped out of college and started some kind of internet business. But the details of my success had been largely kept private by my parents. Marcus was there with his wife Jennifer, both of them looking every inch the successful young professionals they had become. Claire had driven up from medical school, radiant in her white coat confidence and 3 years of surgical training. Seeing my siblings in person for the first time in over a year reminded me how completely our paths had diverged. "Olivia!" Claire rushed over to hug me, her enthusiasm genuine and warm. "Mom said you might not make it. I'm so glad you're here." "I wouldn't miss Mom's 60th for anything," I said, accepting her embrace and trying to push down the complex emotions that came with being back in this space. Marcus approached more cautiously, his greeting polite, but reserved. He had always been the most invested in maintaining our family's reputation, and my unconventional path had embarrassed him more than he had ever admitted. "How's business?" he asked, the question carrying undertones I couldn't quite decipher. "Growing," I replied simply. "How's consulting?" "Good. Busy. We just moved to a bigger apartment in Palo Alto." It was the kind of small talk we had perfected over years of avoiding real conversations about our lives. Safe, surface level, designed to maintain civility without risking any deeper understanding. The evening progressed through the predictable rhythms of a family gathering. There was dinner around the dining room table that had hosted thousands of meals during my childhood, stories shared about my mother's younger years, and the presentation of carefully chosen gifts that reflected decades of knowing someone's taste and preferences. I gave my mother a handcrafted jewelry box made by one of Elena's ceramic artists, filled with a collection of pieces from various hometown crafted partners. She opened it carefully, running her fingers over the smooth pottery and examining each necklace and bracelet with genuine appreciation. "These are gorgeous, Olivia. Did you make them?" "I work with the artisans who made them," I explained. "Each piece comes from a different small business across the country." This necklace is from a jeweler in Montana. These earrings are from a designer in South Carolina. As I described each piece and the story behind it, I realized I was essentially giving a presentation about my business model to my extended family. The room had grown quiet, with everyone listening as I explained how Hometown Crafted connected consumers with American makers, how we had grown to represent hundreds of artisans, how our platform was helping small businesses thrive in an increasingly corporate marketplace. "How many people work for your company now?" asked Mrs. Patterson, my former high school English teacher. 23 full-time employees, plus all the artisan partners we work with. "And you started this when you were how old?" 20. "I launched the first version of the website from my studio apartment when I was 20. The questions continued for nearly an hour. I found myself describing our growth trajectory, our mission, our impact on small American manufacturers. The more I talked, the more I realized that none of these people, including my parents, had ever really understood what I had built. My father had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, observing rather than participating in conversations. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, he approached me in the kitchen where I was helping my mother with dishes. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. We walked out to the back patio, where I had spent countless childhood evenings catching fireflies and dreaming about my future. The space looked exactly the same, but sitting there as a successful adult instead of a frustrated teenager gave everything a different perspective. "I owe you more than an apology," he said, settling into one of the wicker chairs that had been there since I was in elementary school. "I owe you an explanation." What followed was the most honest conversation my father and I had ever had. He told me about his own father, a man who had worked in a factory his entire life and drummed the importance of education into his children as the only path to security. He explained how his generation had been taught that stability was more valuable than risk, that unconventional choices were luxuries only the wealthy could afford. "When you dropped out of college, I saw my own father's disappointment in me," he said. "I was terrified you were throwing away opportunities that people like us don't get twice." "But I wasn't throwing them away," I said gently. "I was creating different opportunities. I know that now. What I saw tonight, listening to you talk about your business, your employees, the impact you're having. I finally understand that there are multiple paths to success, and yours has been remarkable." The word remarkable, coming from my father, hit me harder than any business achievement ever had. This was the man whose approval I had been chasing for 8 years, whose dismissal had fueled every late night and difficult decision along the way. "I'm proud of you, Olivia," he continued, "not just for the money you've made or the company you've built, but for the woman you've become. You saw something the rest of us couldn't see, and you had the courage to pursue it even when everyone around you said it was impossible." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the suburban neighborhood where I had spent my childhood dreaming of escape. For the first time in years, being in this place felt peaceful instead of suffocating. "There's something else I need to tell you," my father said finally. "Something I should have told you years ago. When you first moved out and started your business, your mother and we were scared. Not just disappointed, but genuinely frightened that you would fail and end up hurt. Every time you called with good news, we held back our enthusiasm because we didn't want to encourage something we thought might collapse. You were protecting me by not believing in me? We thought we were protecting you. It was wrong, and it was cowardly, but it came from love, not from a lack of love." The explanation didn't undo 8 years of feeling unsupported, but it helped me understand the gap that had grown between us. My parents had been trying to shield me from disappointment while I had been fighting for recognition and respect. As I drove home that night, I realized that the homecoming I had experienced wasn't just about returning to my childhood house. It was about finally feeling like I belonged in my own story, not as the rebellious daughter who had rejected her family's values, but as someone who had found a different way to honor the work ethic and determination they had taught me. The validation I had spent years seeking was finally mine. But as I would soon discover, achieving that recognition would bring its own unexpected challenges and force me to confront what I really wanted for the next chapter of my life. 6 weeks after my mother's birthday party, I received a call that would test everything I thought I understood about success and family relationships. My father's voice was shaky when he called me at the office on a Thursday morning in late April. "Olivia, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that there's no pressure to say yes." The formal tone was so unlike him that I immediately felt concerned. "What is it, Dad?" "The school district is hosting their annual fundraising gala next month. It's a big deal. We raise money for programs that the state budget doesn't cover. Things like art classes and music programs. This year, they asked me to invite a keynote speaker who could talk about alternative paths to success. Someone who could inspire students who might not be college-bound." I could hear the nervousness in his voice, the careful way he was building up to his request. "They want you to be the speaker, Olivia. I told them about your story, about what you've built, and they're very interested. But I understand if you'd rather not. I know our family hasn't always been supportive of your choices." The irony was overwhelming. My father, who had spent 8 years dismissing my unconventional path, was now asking me to speak to other people's children about the value of following their dreams outside traditional educational structures. "You want me to give a speech encouraging kids to drop out of college?" I asked, not entirely able to keep the amusement out of my voice. "No," he said quickly. "I want you to talk about having the courage to pursue your passion, whether that's through college or through other paths. About resilience and learning from failure and building something meaningful. About proving that success comes in many forms." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes as he explained the details of the event. It would be held at the convention center downtown with an audience of about 500 people, students, parents, teachers, and community members. The fundraiser typically brought in around $100,000 for district programs, and this year they were hoping to exceed that goal. "I'll do it," I said finally. "Really? You don't need time to think about it? Dad, you're asking me to speak about my journey in front of the community that watched me grow up. How could I say no to that?" The next month was a blur of speech preparation and business management. I had spoken at business conferences and entrepreneurship events before, but this felt different. This was personal. I would be standing in front of people who had known me as the rebellious teenager who dropped out of college. And I would be representing not just my own success, but also my father's willingness to acknowledge that he had been wrong about the rigid path to achievement. Margaret helped me craft the speech, guiding me through the process of distilling 8 years of experiences into 20 minutes of compelling narrative. We worked through multiple drafts, finding the balance between inspiration and honesty, between celebrating unconventional success and acknowledging the real risks and challenges that came with it. "Remember," she said during our final preparation session, "you're not trying to convince everyone to become entrepreneurs. You're trying to show them that there are multiple ways to build a meaningful life." The night of the gala, I stood backstage at the convention center, wearing the same navy dress I had worn to my mother's birthday party but feeling completely different than I had 6 weeks earlier. The nervous energy was familiar. It was the same feeling I'd had before launching Hometown Crafted, before hiring my first employee, before every major decision that had shaped my journey. My parents were in the front row, along with Marcus and Claire, who had both driven up for the event. Elena had come from Eugene, bringing several other artisan partners who wanted to support me. Margaret sat with them, her familiar presence a calming anchor in the sea of faces. But as I walked to the podium and looked out at the audience, I was struck most by the teenagers scattered throughout the crowd. Some looked engaged and curious, others appeared to be there reluctantly, dragged by parents who hoped to inspire them toward achievement. I remembered being their age, feeling trapped by other people's expectations, while harboring dreams that seemed impossible to pursue. "My name is Olivia Rose," I began, "and I'm here tonight because 8 years ago I made a decision that broke my father's heart." The opening line got their attention. I could see people leaning forward, parents glancing at each other, teenagers looking up from their phones. I told them about dropping out of college, about the fights with my family, about the studio apartment and the failed businesses, and the nights when I wondered if everyone who doubted me had been right. I talked about the loneliness of pursuing a path that no one around you understands, and the fear that comes with betting everything on your own vision. But I also told them about the first successful sale, about meeting Margaret, about building something that created opportunities for hundreds of other people. I shared stories about Elena and the other artisans whose lives had been changed by having access to a broader market for their work. Success isn't about proving other people wrong, I said, reaching the core of what I wanted them to understand. It's about being true to your own vision while remaining open to learning from everyone around you, including the people who doubt you. I talked about the importance of resilience, about learning to fail quickly and cheaply, about the difference between taking smart risks and being reckless. I acknowledged that the traditional path through college and corporate careers worked beautifully for many people, including both of my siblings, while also validating the dreams of students who felt called to different approaches. The world needs doctors and teachers and engineers, I said, gesturing toward my family in the front row. But it also needs entrepreneurs and artists and innovators who are willing to build things that don't exist yet. Your job is to figure out which category fits your talents and your calling, not to let other people make that decision for you. The speech concluded with the story of my mother's birthday party and the conversation with my father that had led to this moment. I wanted them to understand that even when families disagree about paths and priorities, love and respect can eventually bridge those gaps. The greatest gift you can give to the people who love you is to become the best version of yourself, whatever that looks like, I said. And sometimes, the greatest gift they can give you is the space to figure out what that version looks like, even when it scares them. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 2 minutes. As I looked out at the crowd, teenagers wiping away tears, parents nodding in recognition, teachers smiling with understanding, I realized I had finally found the words to explain the journey that had brought me to this moment. During the reception afterward, I was surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories. A 16-year-old girl told me about her dream of starting a nonprofit to help homeless animals. A parent thanked me for helping her understand her son's desire to pursue music instead of business school. Several teachers mentioned students they thought could benefit from hearing that there were multiple paths to a fulfilling life. But the conversation that mattered most happened as the event was winding down. My father approached me near the coat check, his eyes bright with an emotion I hadn't seen since I was very young. "That was extraordinary," he said simply. "I've never been more proud of you than I am right now. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. Thank you for living a story worth telling." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the strange circularity of the evening. I had started this journey trying to prove my worth to my family, and I had ended it helping other families understand the value of supporting their children's dreams, even when those dreams seemed risky or unconventional. The fundraiser raised $147,000 for district programs, the highest total in its 15-year history. But more importantly, it marked the completion of my own education, not the one my parents had originally envisioned for me, but the one I had created for myself through years of taking risks, learning from failures, and building something meaningful. 3 months later, I received another acquisition offer, this time for $42 million. I declined it again, but this time the decision came from a place of confidence rather than fear. I wasn't building Hometown Crafted to prove a point anymore. I was building it because I loved the work, because it created value for people I cared about, and because it had become the vehicle through which I could make my best contribution to the world. My relationship with my family continued to heal and evolve. We began having regular dinners together, conversations where business updates were shared alongside medical school stories and consulting project tales. My parents started referring customers to Hometown Crafted when people mentioned looking for unique American-made gifts. Claire decorated her apartment with pieces from our artisan partners. Most importantly, the gap that had existed between my professional success and my personal relationships finally closed. I no longer felt like I had to choose between family approval and entrepreneurial achievement. I had both, not because I had changed who I was, but because I had finally found a way to help the people I loved understand who I had always been. Margaret was right, as usual, when she observed during one of our lunches. "You didn't just build a company, Olivia. You built a bridge between two worlds that seemed incompatible, and now you get to live in both of them." As I write this story now, 5 years after that fundraising gala, Hometown Crafted employs over 150 people and partners, with more than 800 American manufacturers. We've expanded into Canada and the UK, launched a wholesale division, and developed a foundation that provides microloans to emerging artisan businesses. But the metric that matters most to me isn't revenue or growth rates or the quarterly projections that fill my days. It's the fact that last week, when I called my parents to share news about our latest expansion, my father's first question wasn't about financial stability or risk management. It was, "How can your mother and I help?" That question, more than any business achievement, represents the true measure of the empire I built. Not just in dollars and employees and market share, but in understanding, respect, and the kind of love that creates space for people to become exactly who they're meant to be.